This is Trend Following Radio, where great thinking comes alive. Nobel Prize winners, legendary traders, best-selling authors, and the pros that know what drive us irrational human beings. I am your host, Michael Covel. Not filtered, raw, honest. That's my passion. My guest today is Alexander Osterwalder. He has written a bunch of really cool business books, not only from the content, but from the design perspective. And now, along with his co-authors, they have another one, The Invincible Company, how to constantly reinvent your organization with inspiration from the world's best business models. I really like that perspective. What's the business model? Don't necessarily tell me about the product or the service or whatever. Talk about the model. What's a good model? Who has the good models? Why do they work? That to me seems like a hell of a smart direction to go in. And not surprisingly to you, probably, especially for those of you that have seen my books, even though Alex and his team are going into businesses, this conversation to me starts to sound a lot like trend following. Models for business, models for trend following, a bunch of small losses and a few big winners. Without any further delay, let me jump right into my conversation with Alexander Osterwalder. So here's where I want to jump in, Alex. Something about me briefly. I write these investment books and I've written them for 15 years. There's 5 of them. There's a certain thinking, a certain philosophical thinking to these investment books. I could not help but think when I saw your work, I was like, well, gosh, if we can't have a good conversation, there's something wrong with us. Here's the crux of these investment books. Not buy and hold, not value investing, anything like that. It's all predicated on the idea of having a diversified portfolio. From that portfolio at the beginning of the year, one has no idea what's going to happen. However, whichever market goes your way, momentum-wise, you get on and you go with it. At the end of the year, you have something like 30 or 40% winners. Your winners are much bigger than your losers, but you're going to have a lot of small losses on your way to trying to find a big unexpected gain. Gee, that sounds a lot like your world, doesn't it?
Absolutely. I mean, that's what we try to bring to companies when they invest in new ideas. They have the same approach. They have a portfolio. The most important aspect of that is that senior leaders need to understand that exploitation of existing business models and the search and exploration of new ones is fundamentally different. When you search for outliers, but you really don't know which one is going to win, you actually need to spread your portfolio and invest in many, many, many ideas so that one can really take off. You can't pick the winner. That's the fundamental thesis in innovation exploration. And that's how venture capitalists have always invested because they know they can't pick the winner. But I think this is now increasingly getting into the corporate world. And I'm not talking about just corporate venture capital. I'm talking about internal projects. And how do you really do this to let the winners emerge? You kind of need to create this internally in your organization for winners to emerge because you can't pick them. You don't know. Nobody's been in the future. So there's no chance you can pick them.
Now, you talk about this, and I'll let you give your feelings on it as well. Jeff Bezos talks about it in his shareholder letters. He talks about this very issue. If you were to sit down and you have a chance to talk with a lot of interesting people at a lot of interesting companies, yes, people have seen your work. Yes, a lot of significant people go, oh, yes, this is a no-brainer. I need to adopt this mindset right now. However, there's still pushback. There's still people that kind of say, no way.
They actually never say no way. They just say, oh, wow, this is hard. Because while it's very clear and it looks easy, it's incredibly hard to put in place because you need to basically build 2 cultures under the same roof. It's not that everybody needs to be an innovator, like a business model innovator and create the next Amazon Web Services. You need to have a world-class execution culture, those who manage the existing businesses. And in parallel, you need a world-class exploration culture, and that is very different. That's really hard to pull off because investment style is different, the culture is different. It's not execution, it's iteration. You actually need to fail a lot. It's very hard to build that second culture in a world that's dominated by execution. I rarely hear anybody say, nah, this doesn't work. It makes 100% sense, in particular because now we have good examples where that worked. Amazon is a great one, probably most cited. The one I liked a lot is Ping An from China. Within 7 years, they transformed from a financial conglomerate focused on banking and insurance to become a technology company in 7 years. And the only way they could do that and pull it off is by building this culture of exploration where it's okay to fail. Peter Ma, the founder, put in place with Jessica Tan, a co-CEO, who had the mandate to turn Ping An into a tech company. And Peter Ma said, you're not going to get it right because we don't know how to do this. You just need to try, explore, and we will get there. That culture of failing a lot is hard to implement. It's also very long-term. One of the things you hear a lot from senior leaders, from CEOs, oh, we can't do long-term because the stock market is short-term, et cetera. And that is true to a certain extent, but sometimes it sounds a little bit like an excuse. I know it sounds, okay, what is this guy saying? He's never managed a multi-billion-dollar company. But I talk to these CEOs, they get it, but they also see, they're very receptive to hear the examples of those CEOs who've done it. A good one is Paul Polman, because with Jeff Bezos, it's easy. He's a majority owner of the votes, so he can do whatever he wants. But take Paul Polman, who, when he took over Unilever as CEO, first thing he did is he abolished quarterly reporting. And he said, we're going to do yearly reporting because we're in it for the long term. So if you're interested in quarterly returns, don't invest in us. So he's very clear. The reason he did that is because he wanted, and they really put this in place in Unilever to become a company that's focused on sustainability, growth, and profit. Not two topics that should be at the expense of each other, growth and profit and sustainability, but in harmony. He was able to pull it off. So there are companies or there are leaders that are able to do this, but it's really hard. That's what leaders see first. Wow, this is going to be hard to create A, a long-term culture, B, a culture where failure is okay, and then C, completely different investment style where you actually embrace risk, you manage risk, you embrace it, you don't make crazy bets, you make a lot of bets. It's really hard. But now what's really great to see is a lot of CEOs are starting to get there.
Let me bring it back to quarterly returns in a second. That really spurred a thought in me. But I wanted to bring up two quick examples as we talk, because you're kind of describing something like, okay, here's the ongoing business, but we need to have this kind of side project. I mean, I'm kind of generalizing here, and these aren't the terms you would use, but in many ways, I can think back to Ma Bell, the phone company in the States. We all learned later on they had Bell Labs, where all these math geniuses were doing all this cool stuff like Claude Shannon, et cetera. But I could also think of, if I watched the movie The Dark Knight, there's Morgan Freeman who's handling the front end of Wayne Enterprises, and the young accountant is like, hey, what's this off the book stuff? What is all this Batman stuff? There's this whole side project going on. But I think what's interesting about the quarterly returns aspect, if I want to compare it to my world as well, if you focus on quarterly returns, you're focusing on consistency. You're pretending that you can kind of force the market to give you something consistently. Whereas if you say no to quarterly returns, you don't have a constraint that's artificial to begin with, because if you don't make any money, for example, in the trading world, if you don't make any money for 11 months and you're flat or whatever, or let's use right now, the first couple months of the year, not much is going on. All of a sudden, a trading strategy that is faced with a March 2020 has all kinds of opportunity. You couldn't predict that. You couldn't plan that. You had to be ready for something like that.
Absolutely. So there's two things to that. The first one is that you need to have the predictability in your execution business. So it's okay to have a business where you say, we need predictability. When you're managing a business, you know the customers, you know the channels, you know the environment. There is no room for big failures. We need to be good at that part. But we need the additional part where we're extremely strong at experimentation and adaptation, and we're extremely strong at portfolio management, making many, many small bets and just investing more in those bets that are showing signs of success. Again, exploit, explore. But I'll bring it back to what you said at the beginning, the side projects. That's exactly the problem, that today in most companies, exploration is a side project. It's not strategic. Then it doesn't work. Steve Blank, who launched the whole lean startup movement, changed the way entrepreneurship is taught. He likes to say that's innovation theater. If you don't make it strategic, if you don't make exploration strategic, you're never going to get good at it. And you're never going to find the next big growth engines. And that's exactly why most companies are really bad at growth and transformation. That's why a lot of companies today are struggling in this very uncertain environment, because they've never built a strong strategic exploration capability. So they're extremely good at execution, but execution only works when your environment is relatively stable. That is definitely not the case now. What you'll see is that those companies that were good in times of stability already then to explore, they're good now. They're ready for this really, really crazy environment where nothing is certain. All the variables have changed. You can really see now which companies are prepared to explore because they can turn around their business very quickly. The last thing really to emphasize here is one is not more important than the other. Because you can see companies that started to really explore, I'd take GE as an example, they were relatively good at putting in place exploratory capabilities, but they really struggled in the execution part. Their core business was not strong enough. The exploration didn't make up for their deficiencies in the exploitation part. You can't do one or the other, it's an and. That's the thing. It's not a side project. And maybe, a way to frame it is also today innovators like to call themselves pirates. That's silly, because what did we do historically with pirates? We killed them. Don't call yourself a pirate. Become a bit more strategic. So a friend of mine who's part of the Strategyzer team, thought leader Tendai Vicky, he likes to say, well, Alex, but they're pirates in the Navy, where you actually have a legitimacy to explore. We really need to give innovation, exploration, an important strategic mandate in the company. These are not side projects. As long as they're side projects, you'll never look like Amazon. When you start to make it strategic, you'll look a lot more like Amazon and like Ping An, but it's really hard to pull off.
I knew you were going to not like that term side project. My mind was scanning for something a little more robust and a little more equal to the other side of the coin, the existing biz side. Just a quick side self-promotion here. Steve Blank has been on this podcast. He's coming on again soon. And also, too, I should give it a little self-promotion to your book, which I have a fine copy of in my hands. Our conversation today, and I can't say this about a lot of books, but our conversation today has no chance to show the detail that exists in this book. It just has no chance because, with all due respect, your book is kind of like computer code in a way. It really is. It's like code. It's a system. We're having a conversation about that system. We're picking out some general topic areas and whatnot. But this is really a dense read. As you have been saying from the start here, this is kind of hard. Hell, when you start to look at the details of what it encompasses, just making the shift, how you guys write it out, that's hard alone.
The way I look at innovation and exploration is that it's really starting to become a profession. I think of it more as finance and accounting, where you can't just go to a weekend workshop and then you're a world-class finance person or a world-class accountant, or I even like to use the medical profession. You don't go to a weekend workshop and then you do a new kind of surgical procedure. These are things that you need to learn. They're not easy. So what we try to do is make it as simple, as practical as possible with the little pieces, and then you put the little pieces together to get the bigger piece. So for me, the analogy of the surgeon or doctor is probably the best. You need to be able to study anatomy and physiology to understand the basics. Same in business, exploration, understand the fundamentals of business models and value propositions. Sounds kind of trivial, but it's not. And then you start to get good at snipping around on dead bodies when you're a doctor before you ever get to touch a real body. So you need to just build it up. That's, I think, where innovation is today. It used to be the Wild West, and we could say, oh, we're going to do this lean startup thing. We're going to do experimentation and failure, and we're going to get it right. Well, that used to be the case 10 years ago. Today, there are ways to measure the reduction of risk and uncertainty. So it's almost getting boring because we're leaving the Wild West behind us because now we know how to do it. It's resembling accounting a lot more, which also means if you want to get good at this, you need to put in a lot of hours to A, learn the fundamentals, and B, practice. Because it's just like in medicine, in sports, etc. You don't become world class at something overnight. The good news is now there are the tools and processes and ways to learn to get better at this. But more like cycling, you have to do it to understand, right? You can't just learn it theoretically. That's a big challenge.
Let me keep you at culture for a moment. We kind of hinted at this, but I want you to really define, because if we take the innovation arm, first off, it's the existing business. We've got the innovation arm, and I know you would like to see these positioned as kind of equal units for ultimate long-term success. But the culture of these two sides of the coin, the existing biz and the innovation arm, these cultures are very different. I can see if you're attempting to introduce this into an existing culture already, it's going to be very, very difficult. Speak to the idea of these two cultures, and ultimately I think competing is the right word, but they're just very different.
They're not competing. Yeah, that's correct. They're very, very different. That's also correct. And that's the challenge. One culture, the execution culture, the exploit culture, and running a business, the management culture, is about planning and execution. What's our target? How do we get from here to there to meet the target? We can predict. There is some predictability, and you need to meet the plan. It's execution. That's where business plans actually make sense. When we explore, there's no value in making a business plan of how we're going to execute from idea to business because your idea is a fantasy. So what you really need to do is plan how you're going to constantly experiment and adapt. You have an idea for a new market opportunity to new technology. The difficult part is not the idea. The idea is free. They're everywhere. The difficult part is how can I rapidly turn an idea and opportunity into a value proposition that customers care about, embedded in a business model that can scale? And how can I do that fast and systematically? Speed is essential. Experimentation is essential. But when you experiment, you're going to fail a lot because you don't know what works. But you're not going to punish failure. You're going to encourage systematic, manageable, cheap failure so you can constantly adapt your idea in lightning speed until you know what's really going to work. Those two cultures are fundamentally different. So what does that mean? Oh, yeah, we're going to try to create these two cultures. It's not good enough. You need to design and manage those two cultures and how they coexist. You need to build the bridges. Now, how do you do that? It's not that hard from a theoretical point of view. It's hard to implement. You need to put in place the right kind of leadership system in terms of support, in terms of what do you reward, in terms of what does management spend time with, in terms of all those kind of things, resource allocation. The second aspect is organizational design. You need to create an org chart where both cultures have a powerful place to live. And we like to call that the chief execution officer on the one hand and the chief entrepreneur on the other hand, and they're equal. It's not one reports to the other, they're equal. And when ideas become mature enough from the entrepreneurial ecosystem, you throw them over. When they're protected enough, you throw them over to the execution system. So you don't have turf fights. Who's going to keep the best idea? No, one is exploration, one is execution. And then the last piece is you need to just manage the tools differently. The exploitation side, the traditional one that we know, managing a business, those are different tools than the exploration side. So you need to work on all levels. And we like to say they're enablers that you can put in place and blockers that you need to eliminate, and your culture will emerge. You can't just change behaviors like that. You need to work on the blockers and the enablers, and you can design and manage culture. So again, it's a fuzzy term, culture, But we now figured out, over years of failing at this, we now figured out how you can design those two different cultures and make them live in harmony. It's hard to pull off, but it's possible. Again, it's not rocket science. You just need to have the energy and commitment to do it. Usually, when the management is fully behind it, it's possible. It's rare that when the management is fully behind it, that they can't pull it off. It never works when the management is not behind it.
I don't think you're going to correct me here. I'll be surprised if you do, but hey, I'm about to throw a shot in the dark, an educated shot in the dark. Here we are in March 2020. The world is in the middle of all kinds of chaos. And so there's going to be a lot of people post this period of time where there will be all these, quote, new techniques that supposedly have come from this experience. I can't imagine that there's anything about your work in this book that is somehow or another affected by the current chaos. Because I would argue that you guys have already built in to your work the opportunity for these kinds of game changers to exist. That's the whole point of having an adaptable, systematic approach.
Absolutely. It's all about resilience. So we arrogantly called it the Invincible company. The truth, of course, is, and that's what we're seeing now, is practically no company is invincible, but you can build really, really strong resilience if you have those two cultures. Absolutely. You can see today already those companies that built in that resilience, that ability to be extremely adaptive, they're having a much easier time to survive in these turbulent days because they have an exploration culture that is going to help the execution culture kind of survive. I don't think this is irrelevant at all. And I was asking myself, is it even relevant, or is it insensitive to launch a book during these uncertain times? So I put up a Twitter poll, and within hours, we had 1,500 votes where over 85%, I think it was 84, 85% said, Alex, go on with the book launch. This is extremely relevant for the world we were in. Now, of course, if we look at today, this is an atomic bomb type of scenario. No company can ever be prepared for something of this order of magnitude, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to manage in more calmer times. However, those companies that have more resilience built in are better prepared for this. If you need to put these things in place, because the world is going to be more uncertain. Now we have extreme uncertainty, but in general, it's much harder to predict where the world is going. Technology, competitors, it's crazy time.
I want to use two examples, and you can run with this opening salvo for me. But if I look at something, if I look at the current times right now, and this is just picking two headline companies, Boeing and Apple. Okay, and let's just pretend that resilience is how much cash you have in the bank, because that seems to be a pretty good measure of resilience right now. And Boeing has decided in the last handful of years that we were going to really got all this great innovation, this company that produces these planes, these 787s, really cool to fly on, great experience. But the managers decided, hey, let's boost share value. Let's take our cash and do these buybacks and all this kind of stuff. Well, Apple, I don't know exactly what they've done, but I know they sit on a mountain of cash. They're different models and all that stuff. I'm not trying to make an exact comp, but the mindset is definitely different. You have to think that part of that Apple mindset goes back to Jobs and perhaps the experiences he had early on, that when he had a chance to start to assemble on his second round of being a CEO, he had a chance to assemble a mountain of cash. It seems like, as an outsider looking in, he really thought, gosh, you know what? This is my resilience. Let me keep some cash in the bank, a lot of cash in the bank. Whereas now we have a nuclear bomb drop, so to speak, in March of 2020, and a lot of companies could have had that cash and they don't.
Yeah, that's definitely essential, that the cash that you have. And what you can clearly see is those organizations that use their cash to buy back shares, or those organizations that invest in the future in exploration, not just technology innovation. Innovation is not R&D. Innovation is exploring new value propositions and new business models. Those who invested that cash into exploration, like Ping An, for example, like Amazon, like Apple before, when Steve Jobs took over, now they have so much cash that they're starting to buy back shares as well. They don't know what to do with it. But those companies are more resilient. So it's not just the cash itself that you have now to survive, but it's also how did you invest the cash before? Because here's the thing. If you take Apple as an example, they're suffering today as well. But their business model will survive because it's an incredibly powerful business model. They're not just playing in an industry. They built an ecosystem of a business model with app developers, everything fits together, and there are huge moats around that business model. If you take a company like Boeing, they put themselves into one concrete industry. Today, industry-based business models are a lot more vulnerable than those that transcend industry boundaries, those that have a business model as unit of analysis and not the industry. There are a couple of things that I would say went wrong. And again, I've never managed a company of the size of Boeing, but there are a couple of things that went wrong at Boeing. And the big one was to focus purely on execution, getting leaner and leaner in the traditional sense to an extreme where they did illegal stuff, but they never really used any of the cash to build exploratory capabilities or to build a stronger business model. They milked and milked and milked an existing business model that was increasingly outdated. Today, if you define yourself by your industry, you're not going to survive for long. When a crisis like today, this atomic bomb drops, is just going to accelerate your mortality, your corporate mortality. So I like to say that companies that focus purely on efficiency and cost cutting and getting better only at what they're already good at, they're actually more efficiently dying because they're cutting out everything that allows them to be ready for the future. And that's exactly what happened at Boeing. Not a case that I know extremely well, but that I followed from the sidelines, also through Rita McGrath, who has written a lot about some of the mistakes they made at Boeing. And that's what you see in companies today, I think, before the crisis, and you'll see it afterwards. Those companies that just get better at what they're already good at, they're increasing their likelihood of corporate death. Those companies that build exploratory capabilities, and I call this business R&D, business research and development, not just technological R&D, because that's a subset of innovation, but the ability to launch, explore, and then launch new value propositions and business models, those companies will win. We can already see the winners emerging. Today, it's a little bit anecdotal, and there's a lot of luck. It depends on one good leader. But we have the code now. There are a lot of thinkers who've been working on this. Now the only thing is, how do we make it practical so leaders finally implement this? It's not a question mark anymore. How do you do this? The question mark is only, when are leaders finally going to change? Again, I'm not trying to say, this is easy to do. The courageous leaders are starting to do this, and this crisis will accelerate that move by 100.
By the way, I've not paid you to name drop your associates who have appeared on this podcast. Rita McGrath has also appeared on this podcast. Hey, quick question, just a big picture one. The Invincible company, this term, Invincible versus monopoly, what kind of headspace are we touching on here?
Yeah, of course. Once you become practically invincible, you say, okay, the monopoly brings you into the invincible space. Now, I do believe that innovation, and obviously, it's kind of a hard argument to make when you have companies like Apple and Amazon and Facebook and so dominating the world. But I do believe that innovation will always try to kind of kill the companies at the top. That's why the only way they can stay ahead is actually not to build a monopoly. A powerful business model is a great way to build a fortress, but it's not enough. I believe that every company, even with their fortress, they have to, in order to stay ahead, they have to be able to reinvent themselves all the time. If you take Apple, they're so powerful because they never stopped for a long time, let's say under the Steve Jobs, they never stopped reinventing their business model. It wasn't just the technology, it was really reinventing the business model. Same with Amazon. Yes, of course, they have a stronghold on many industries, but what's keeping them ahead is not just focusing on those, but it's constantly exploring new areas. You could say Amazon was dominating e-commerce, but that was not the best business to be in because the margins are laser thin. It's not profitable at all. But they constantly explored, and that's how many things that were successful emerged, like Amazon Web Services. And Amazon Web Services is so much more profitable. And now analysts used to hate that. Now they love it. That was an exploratory capability. So it's actually not focusing on a monopoly. Amazon could have focused just on e-commerce. But no, they said, this is the thing about Jeff Bezos. He's obsessed by the fact that Amazon as a company could die. He actually doesn't even formulate it as it could. He says, inevitably, every company dies. So the only thing you can do is keep a culture of day one. So monopoly is not good enough. Monopoly is not good enough. You'll be either disrupted by competitors or you'll be taken apart by the government. You need to constantly explore. And that's what we call invincible companies. They're not even happy with striving for monopoly. They think that even that is not enough. They need to constantly reinvent themselves because inevitably every company will die.
Okay, here's a great example. So let's just keep it at Amazon for a second. I posted something roughly about this thought earlier today or yesterday. And I was talking about the United States Postal Service. They're saying right now, if the USPS does not get a bailout in the next couple months, it's toast. Well, Americans have been hearing that the U.S. Postal Service has been basically bankrupt for decades. Anyone that knows anything about that system, I mean, it's just the most inefficient. It's basically Newman from the Seinfeld show in real life. And this is what it is. However, what's really interesting is that Jeff Bezos has used the United States Postal Service as part of his foundation to become perhaps the wealthiest guy in the world. Now, at some point in time, I'm sure he thinks about this all the time. And look, I give Bezos all the credit for figuring out that inefficiency, meaning, okay, I want to start a delivery company. It's more than just a delivery company, but I want to start this company that utilizes delivery. I've got the United States Postal Service. Wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. However, he must be worried every day or be thinking about every day what happens if that government service goes away, because that's an integral part of his business.
Oh, yeah. And I think that's exactly why Amazon continues to explore, because this is in the mindset of Amazon. Inevitably, the pieces that work today, they will die. So they start exploring with new ways to replace everything that could die. And they're constantly trying to figure out how could they get better. And not just from a company perspective. I mean, what's incredibly ingrained in their culture is always at the service of the customer. They always have this attitude of day one. They believe we're really powerful now, but it's going to go away. It's going to go away. So we need to continue to explore. How can we get better? How can we figure out those pieces that will fall away? How can we replace them? There are a lot of things we can criticize about Amazon and Jeff Bezos. Absolutely. But there are a lot of things that we also need to admire. And I think the biggest one is this willingness to always explore and always be able to think about replacing all of the pieces. Because the danger in general is when you're successful, you get complacent. I'll give you an example of a company. I won't mention the name, but it was in Asia. Went to a company and we went to the headquarters. It's a huge company. And they said, hey, Alex, look, this is our building. We call it 100 years. Because they were proud of the 100 years of existence of this company. And that's great. Then I told them, well, you know how Amazon calls their headquarters? Day one, right? So do you see the difference in attitude? And I'm not saying you shouldn't be proud of existing for 100 years, but when you're about the 100 years, you're getting relaxed and say, hey, we're on top of the world. You can't have that attitude. You always need to have that attitude of day one. And I think that's one of the things that is admirable at Amazon, with all the flaws that the company has, is there is this attitude of day one all the time. They're trying not to be arrogant in the sense that it can always go away. They might come across as arrogant because they're so big and powerful, but the attitude is always, this can go away. We need to get better. We need to get better every day. And that is pretty amazing. And not just better at efficiency innovation, but also better at building the fundamentals, like the delivery system.
Let me give something tangible. I'm looking at a screenshot that I put on my big screen here. It's from your book. It says, what about your industry? And let me read a few details from this to paint a picture for the audience. The top line is industry, disruptor, and to be disrupted, 3 columns. And the first column, industry, you have messaging, the disruptor, WhatsApp, WeChat. Industry, auto, the disruptor, Tesla. Industry, retail, the disruptor, Amazon, Alibaba, and so on. For example, the industry, taxi, Uber, Didi. And then over on the other column, the far right column, to be disrupted, banking, pharmaceuticals, legal services, education. My gosh, especially when you're looking at right now what's happening in March 2020, banking, pharmaceuticals, education. I mean, how much can you start to imagine that education can possibly be disrupted when we've literally taken billions of kids and taking them out of school, and somehow or another in 2020, we can't teach these kids online immediately? It is an absolute abysmal performance for the adults in our society that we could not pivot and teach these kids from home on a dime.
It's crazy. This is a huge accelerator of transformation. Now we're seeing which business models or which industries are struggling most. What strikes me always, and this is where take Vinod Kosh likes to talk about this, he says innovation happens at the fringes, and Rita McGrath talks about this a lot. So far, the companies have rarely been the transformers of industries, but it's slowly happening. I do think, take Ping An, which is one of my favorite examples at the moment. Again, this used to be a finance conglomerate. Well, guess what? They're now running the biggest health platform on the planet with Ping An Good Doctor. This is close to 300 million people, the users. This did not come from a pharmaceutical company. This did not come from a healthcare company. This came from a banking and insurance conglomerate. Wow. It is happening now that the established players are starting to understand if they don't reinvent themselves and the arenas they play in, they're going to die. They're going to get disrupted. So far, I'd say still 95% of the large corporations that I meet, the CEOs that I talk to, they're still in this old mindset of we're going to protect our business model in our industry, et cetera. And only few are really moving. They all get it. We have great conversations, but the move needs to be so bold. That's what Peter Ma did with Ping An. The move needs to be so bold, not to make big crazy bets, but to build the culture. It's not about big and crazy bets. Actually, we've seen a lot of those and they all went south. One of my favorite examples is Flow TV by Qualcomm. That was a big and crazy bet. Well, guess what? It failed. They had to fire the few customers they had. This was mobile TV in the US. They had to fire the few customers they had because it was a silly big bet. Making bold moves is not about making big, crazy bets. It's about creating the ecosystem that allows the crazy ideas that have potential to emerge phase by phase. That's what leaders need to do. But to put that in place, they need to radically transform the org chart. They need to radically give innovation, growth, and transformation more power. They actually probably even need to let go of a lot of power if it's not them managing growth and transformation. I like to say they need to spend 50% of their time, CEOs, he or she needs to spend 50% of their time every week on innovation. And if they don't, guess what? Innovation is not going to happen. So this transformation is possible. The disruption doesn't have to come from outside of the system, but it would require that leaders need to spend a lot more time on innovation and give innovation a lot more power in their organization. If they don't, they'll be disrupted. It's almost inevitable. I'd like to say almost because who knows? But there is a possibility. We now know how to do it. It's only a question of commitment.
I'm looking still at this chart, and I'm looking at the industries that have the disruptor next to them. Again, recruitment, LinkedIn's the disruptor, travel booking, Expedia, the disruptor, venture capital, Andreessen Horowitz, the disruptor. You can see just how clearly those industries have been disrupted. Anybody that has any kind of sense about these businesses in the business world, you just get it immediately. And then you look at the list of to be disrupted. I'm staring at healthcare, especially March 2020. And I'm thinking to myself, I pay some healthcare company about now $1,000 a month. So in case I fall on my head, my family will not be burdened with me being a vegetable. But I'm thinking the only thing that company has asked me about my health was when I signed up. Did I smoke or did I not smoke 20 years ago? Can you imagine with all, look, if you just took a bunch of smart people and sat down and, hey, let's brainstorm a little, let's try some little experiments and whatnot, who in the world would keep healthcare at such a simplistic mindset? Whereas today, and I think we're going to have a lot of data after Corona is finished, we're going to find out that some things that can unfold, for example, a pandemic that affects the lungs, if you have pre-existing health directions that you've gone, for example, smoking, that's going to probably end up being data that we have that says, gosh, that was really not wise. So you just can start to imagine the disruption that can happen. When I look at the list of the industries that have been disrupted and I look at the ones that have not been disrupted, you just shake your head and you say, gosh, how is all that opportunity still there?
Yeah, that's the right way to frame it. It's an opportunity. A couple of weeks ago, when the world was just still kind of fine, I was with a big European financial conglomerate, and I was talking to the group of CEOs there in a closed door meeting. And my point was that right now is still a great opportunity to be the leader and disrupt your industry arena because the opportunity is there. Nobody has moved dramatically enough. Asia has done it, but you take North America, you take Europe, the opportunity is still there in the financial kind of area. Finance companies could become actually big health players as well. The opportunities are there, but there are very few established companies where the leaders make the bold move to actually use that, to exploit that opportunity. Every company will say, yeah, we do innovation. Oh, we have an accelerator. So all of them are doing something, but what's lacking is the bold move to really embrace the opportunity and explore it in a strategic way. That's exactly what Ping An did, and that's what Amazon does all the time. That's what's lacking. It's not where everybody's doing innovation, but it's innovation theater. To use Steve Blank's term, which I love, what we need is bold leaders who move into those spaces. And it's not about creating just financial returns for investors and owners. It's about creating value. This is more value creation for customers, for society. So that's why I believe in this move. I'm not in it for this to just help companies make more money or investors make more money. I believe there is almost a moral obligation to help these big players innovate because they can create so much more value. And the second part is that if these big companies get better at reinventing themselves, there's also more job security. I think it's crazy to say, oh yeah, but that's the corporate life cycle. Big companies die, startups, they will take over. The human cost of a company laying off, and we're seeing this right now, the human cost of a company laying off tens of thousands of people is too big. We have to help these established companies reinvent themselves so we can create job security, so we can create more customer value.
Have you been paying attention to the news? My country just invents money to bail out anybody that made stupid moves for the last decade. I mean, come on. There's no one fails in America anymore. You just get more money to keep doing the same crap you've been doing.
It's crazy. It's crazy. But that's going to change. Rita McGrath, who's, as you said, also on your show, she's writing a lot about how these kind of big shifts might lead to also a societal change. And companies will, I believe, and this is maybe the positive attitude, I like to be a bit more positive than negative, I believe companies will change their attitude after this by a lot. Because I was in a call yesterday where somebody said companies can't trust their employees, it's really hard. And then somebody else said, well, guess what? If you treat your team, your staff, your employees in a transactional way for decades and you don't treat them right, you cannot expect that they're going to trust you. You don't even have the right to ask them to do what you're asking them to do because you never established the trust that you are a great workplace. Because 7 out of 10 people, they don't want to do what they're doing. They don't want to work where they work because companies never took their societal role. And I'm sorry for generalizing, but a lot of companies didn't take their societal role seriously enough. The time we spend at work is part of how we contribute to society. Employers and leaders have a huge role in society because we spend 8 to 16 hours per day at work. If that is a terrible experience, guess what? We're contributing towards a terrible world. If that is a great experience where people respect each other, where people are caring for each other at the workplace, we're contributing to a better world. So I'm a bit idealistic around those topics, but I do think we will see a faster shift because I've seen it already happening at some companies. But this is a catalyst. This will accelerate the shift. People will not accept the crazy bad working conditions and work environment that they had so far. And I'm talking not just about compensation, so I'm talking about culture. the respect, that people have, the care, etc., that has gone lost in many, many companies.
Let me drop a name here and let's theorize how these guys and ladies could get it turned around. United Airlines, clearly all kinds of trouble. U.S. carrier, all kinds of trouble. A lot of carriers are going to have trouble, but I can pick on United for a lot of reasons. How does a company like United, with such an installed staff base, very union, I don't think, not only the customers of United generally not happy, but the staff is usually not happy either. How can a company like that, so entrenched, make the pivot to open up to your world? I guess the ultimate question here, without picking on United too much, can some companies just literally not in this lifetime get to where you're going with the Invincible company?
I think it's possible.
Possible for everybody. You think it's not closed to any company. Any company could pivot. It might be harder for some, easier for others, but any company could pivot in your opinion.
I believe so. And again, I'm a very positive nature, and that's maybe too optimistic, but I believe so. Again, only when the leadership is, it sounds trivial, but it's not. It means the leadership focuses on that particular goal and puts everything in place to make that happen, which means changing the org chart in a way that has never been done before. And that is exactly what you can see at companies that are great at exploration. They do this. So for me, there's the one part is how can you reinvent your business model? And then there's the other aspect, which is more about management innovation, where it's about what culture in general do you put in place? Can you create in a culture where people were seen as little cogs and weren't respected? Can you shift towards a culture of care, a culture of collaboration between leadership and team? I believe so. I've seen it happen. Some younger companies had to do radical turnarounds. At Uber, there was a terrible culture. They had to go very quickly through a turnaround. Now, did they fully get there? I would say not yet, but they had to do that change very quickly. But again, it's only when the entire leadership team is united around this. And one of the big, I'd say, shifts where, at least at the leadership level, this was an amazing shift in terms of culture, was at Ford, where Alan Mulally turned around Ford from a $17 billion loss-making monster, and they didn't get government support. They did it, or Alan Mulally did it, by changing the leadership culture, where it became a lot more responsible and collaborative. And he didn't do it by pure force, but he did it through care. It was unbelievable. You'd say, how is that even possible that a 17 billion loss-making monster can be turned around? But we've seen a couple of those. That has to do a lot with culture. I believe it's possible. If Ford could do it with Alan Mulally, then an airline should be able to do it as well. Now, of course, it's more difficult because the atomic kind of bomb scenario that is making it very hard. I believe every company can do it. It's a leadership challenge.
Let me get one last question at you. You have a series of books here that kind of all go together. People will have to check those out on Amazon, whatnot, bookstores. This is an author question. What is the history of the design of these books? Very, I don't know what the exact word is, but very innovative design, very kind of structured in a unique way. A lot of work and a lot of thought has gone into the design of these books. This was not just done overnight.
This was not done overnight. That's absolutely right. Our books are very visual, and we don't really write books. We work on spreads, double pages, to put the concepts there and try to make them as clear, as simple, as visual, and as practical and relevant as possible. And then the text comes around it. The first one we wrote was Business Model Generation with my former PhD supervisor, Yves Pigneur. Basically, we said we can't write about business model innovation without doing it. So we asked ourselves, how would we do it? And we said, well, we'll do Kickstarter before Kickstarter existed. We'll get it crowdfinanced. We'll create a different format. And it was driven by what we liked. We said, we're going to create a book, a management book that we would love to buy. That was landscape format in incredibly or insanely visual, because I think there's things you can't describe with words. You need visuals. Visuals and words together are the best user interface for the human mind. We did that, and we hired back then Alan Smith, who's now my co-founder at Strategyzer. That's how it all started out. And when we sold the publishing rights, because we self-published, when we sold the publishing rights to Wiley, I asked our editor, Richard, would you have ever allowed us to do this if we had been the traditional authors sending you a proposal? And he said, no chance, because you did everything wrong. 4-color book, landscape format. There's no chance we would have ever allowed you to do that. But the thing is, we did what we thought was right for the reader, including even myself back then. And because we've seen it was so successful, we sold millions of copies of Business Model Generation, we continued that tradition for every topic that we tackled. I believe that's the strength. And it's not visual just to put lipstick on a pig. I see really every spread, every double page in the book is like we're thinking about the user experience of every double page, of every spread. User experience and user interface. That's how we see it. So a lot of these spreads have gone through 10 to 15, some of them through, 20 iterations, including the conceptual part of the cases, where we have cases, then the visual aspect of the cases. So there's design at every single level, from the concept to the cases to the visual design. So you're right to say doesn't happen overnight.
I will say it. You don't have to say it, but I will guarantee you, I will bet my entire net worth on it. No publisher, no one that works at a publisher has ever read any of your books.
That's a bit harsh. We're starting a conversation after. So we've been with Wiley now for 10 years. Okay. And this is our 4th book under the Strategyzer series with Wiley.
I mean that from the sense, the publishing business model.
Yeah.
I think when you said they would never let you do what you described or what you ended up producing, I don't think that's necessarily changed so much today. So that's my harsh criticism, is for that alone.
And that's true. And that's entirely true. I will definitely not say that's not true. But it's funny because now after 10 years, I started a conversation with the CEO of Wiley. We only had an email conversation. We're going to start chatting after 10 years. You're absolutely right that for me, the publishing industry, and all of the publishers are very similar. The publishing industry is stuck not in the last century, but 2 centuries ago. Now, it's not as if, take Wiley as an example, they made a lot of acquisitions.
They're my publisher too, so maybe they'll kick me out.
They're doing things, but again, I think it comes back to how serious, how strategic is innovation seen, right? So you're absolutely right that I would say it's not an industry I know really, really well, except the publisher I work with. But as an industry, from what I see as a reader, there are no mind-boggling value propositions. Say, okay, ebooks, they're still extremely basic. So if you take our book, it's very visual. It doesn't work on the formats. With a Kindle, you can hardly read our book because it's not a text-based book. The industry didn't innovate. In this case, not even Amazon. The ebooks are terrible from a format perspective. All you can do is make the letters bigger and smaller. Like, how much innovation is that? It is an industry that's completely stuck. And there's so much opportunity. You were mentioning opportunity before. The opportunity is amazing. Why is there no publisher that creates a platform where you can actually interact a lot more in a more interesting way with the author or other practitioners who use the methods from the author? Why does that not exist? That should.
And for example, why is not every publisher saying, oh, you want to build a beautiful book for one of the newest iPads, the 12-inch iPads?
Exactly.
Completely different ballgame.
Exactly. And that's, again, it comes back to industries get disrupted when there's one company that moves. Right now, it's still the disruptors from outside. The car industry would be in the same place if Tesla hadn't been so disrupted. They would be in exactly the same place, and we would have no electric vehicles. I'd have no doubt about that. If Tesla didn't disrupt this industry, it would be in exactly the same place. We'd have a tiny, tiny, tiny niche market for electric vehicles, but none of the big players would have said, we're going to move in 5-10 years, 100% electric. It needs a disruptor. But the opportunities are there. That's what's mind-boggling. And I sometimes ask myself, why do the big ones not shift? And it is a question of also how leaders are incentivized, how their careers are, and the type of leaders that we have at the helm of most companies. They're executors. And I'm not saying this in a dismissive or arrogant way.
They're missing the innovation arm. They don't have it.
Exactly. They're not entrepreneurs. And that's not to say, again, it's super hard to execute and manage. It's already hard enough. But to execute and manage and create the next growth engines, that is insanely hard. You need to be very entrepreneurial. So I think we're going to see a new breed of leaders that are a lot more Jeff Bezos-like, a lot more Peter Ma, Jessica Tan-like. We'll see those emerge, in particular after this acceleration through COVID-19.
The book, The Invincible Company. Alex, where can we send people? Where would you like them to go? You can buy all your books on Amazon, yours and your co-authors. What website would you like people to venture to?
I think it's best if they go to Strategyzer.com, because you can get a lot of free stuff there. If you're still on the fence and you say, well, what's this visual book thing? I don't get it. You can actually get a 100-page preview. We really believe in the freemium model. Get a 100-page preview, form your opinion, and also go more to get some online courses and so. So we give a lot away. That's where you'll find all our stuff, all our thinking. We'll also put the freshest things there, because before anything makes it in a book, we publish it on our website.
Alex, thank you for taking the time today. Hopefully, when the next one comes out, there's always a next one with an author team like you guys have assembled. So please keep me posted, and appreciate you coming on.
What a wonderful conversation. Thanks for having me.
I see a time when those awake will understand how to make money in up, down, and surprise markets. Whether new trader or experienced, college student or financial advisor, protecting against a crash or just trying to make a lot of money, trend following offers everyone an answer in uncertain times. To get started immediately, send me an email, michael@covel.com. I will send you the right trend following steps to take along with my free video. But if you want to buy and hold, trust the government and trust Wall Street, this is absolutely not for you.